provide a platform for discussion that connects people through conversation. A note for the audience, we would love this to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to add your questions in the chat box. We will answer them as we go along, and we will also make sure that we have time for questions at the end. So it's August, and August means Women's Month. But Women's Month in 2020 means that we find ourselves in strange and scary times where the world is facing some of the greatest challenges in living memory. And our industry, the tourism industry, finds itself in the epicenter of that. So for me, one of the very interesting things that has emerged from this crisis is the narrative that female leaders in various parts of the world have managed the COVID crisis better than some of their male counterparts. And it's claimed that their superior performance reflects well-established gender differences and leadership potential. So numerous articles have dug into the fact that, Angela Merkel's, it's about her data-driven trustworthiness, or Jacinta Ardern's empathetic rationality, and Tsai Ing-wen's, quiet resilience. Christina Lagarde from the European Central Bank has praised these women for their rational and empirical based approach, their honest communication, and for really showing that they care. And while, some may argue that it's only just in juxtaposition to some of the more populist male leaders like Trump and Johnson, today we're not here to get into the politics of it. But what we want to take from this is how a small number of female leaders have really emerged as the benchmark for what competent leadership looks like in these turbulent times. And today I am joined by 4 remarkable women for a discussion on what does that look like right here in South Africa, and more specifically in tourism. How do they see female leadership during this time? And what do they believe is the scope for women to leverage technology, to innovate, to challenge, and to change the tourism sector? So our 4 panelists bring with them a really diverse and rich experience from across the tourism landscape. Like, I don't think we could have more breadth and depth than what we do have, from established business to higher education, to entrepreneurship, to social enterprise, and in my case, technology. I'm so excited for today's discussion, and I want to thank you and welcome you. So I have to confess, I've always fancied myself as a bit of a talk show host. And I suspect that today when you meet Kim and Judy and Mabisa and Stella, it's going to feel a little bit more like a talk show than a panel discussion, as we transverse this range of topics from how they've personally responded to the crisis, what are some of the realities that they're dealing with every day, and let's be honest, it's not been easy. With remote working and remote learning, we've seen an acceleration in the adoption of technology, driving much of the change in innovation. But how do we ensure that those with less access don't get completely left behind? Can technology build a more inclusive model of tourism and support those in rural and township communities? Looking forward, what are some of these opportunities that we see in this? And then ultimately, given that so much is up in the air, what advice do they have for other women? And not just other women, but for everybody, as we think about how we define our roles and change the rules moving into a post-COVID world. So with all of that, let me dive straight into it. As I said previously, for the audience, feel free to add your questions in the chat box, and we're going to try and make this as interactive as possible. What we're going to do is we're going to kick off with a round of intros, and how this is going to work is I'll give the official bio, and then I'm going to ask each of my talk show guests to share a little bit of their own personal story of what they've experienced in the last 5 months. So I'm going to start with Kim. Kim Whitaker is a youth travel professional and a proud hostelier as opposed to hotelier. She opened her first youth tourism business at the age of 23, which was probably just a few years ago, Kim, and has gone on to find once in Cape Town and once in Joburg, which are these bustling youth hubs with a motto, and I love this, of clean sheets and dirty adventures. In 2018, Kim founded Puela Youth Tourism Stars, a tourism nonprofit focused on teaching young unemployed women how to work in the youth tourism industry and find jobs. She's won numerous awards. She's been invited by the UNWTO to address heads of state. But what I find really most remarkable is that in 2020, Kim has not just decided to do her executive MBA whilst looking after 2 young children in lockdown, which we all know is no easy feat. She has also started Ubuntu Beds over the last few months. So Kim, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your motivation behind starting Ubuntu Beds and this crazy journey that you've been on?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I mean, what a ride. 2020 has just been like wild. I can't believe it's August already, the month of Leos. I think for my sort of COVID story started in March this year when I returned from Europe. I came from Germany. I was due to visit the ITB travel show, and I came back to South Africa COVID positive. For me, I knew there was a risk, but to me, I just sort of poo-pooed it, and I was like, no, it's just the flu. But being over there and seeing in such a very short time how tourism just sort of imploded in Germany, and seeing my friends in the tourism industry, freaking out and losing their jobs, I returned to South Africa with a little bit of panic, and then found out I was COVID positive. So I had to isolate for a few weeks before lockdown started. And I think this was sort of the backstory that got me thinking about Ubuntu Beds, is that I think I wasn't rushing around. I had to be at home. I had to be self-isolating, and I had time to think a little bit. And I think what I'm most grateful for is being surrounded by people who encouraged me to think positively, and that reminded me that our humanity shines through in times like these. And in this hour, you'll be remembered by the actions that you take. And so so being in tourism, I thought, well, what do we have? What assets do we have at the moment? We've got amazing staff, we've got rooms, we've got beds. And then seeing how the health crisis was unfolding, I thought, well, healthcare workers need a place to stay. And so that's how Ubuntu Beds, which is a technology platform, was born, to unite healthcare workers with empty hotel beds. And it's been quite a journey. I think we're just over 12,000 bed nights now, which is over 4 million rand back into the tourism industry. It's been an amazing journey so far.
And Kim, as a follow-up, as a business owner, how has this crisis impacted the way that you've thought about success?
I think maybe one of the most difficult things for me, being a South African, I've always defined my success as an entrepreneur as my ability to employ people, to offer jobs, to be part of the solution. And I think, we've had to retrench an enormous amount of people in the last month, as we sort of realized we could no longer sustain everyone. And with that comes an immense sort of knock on your confidence, because if success is defined by your ability to job create and to create stability, and you can no longer do that, for me, it was a huge knock to my confidence. And so I think that now success, I've redefined it. And I think that now it's got something more to do with, purpose and, my impact on my community and my greater community, and having conversations with people and trying to allow people to find their own way. And sort of giving very generously of my knowledge, but defining my success more on my community as opposed to my role as an entrepreneur who provides jobs.
And I think that, that focus on community and how do we, build the communities kind of around us is definitely, one of the big trends that we've seen emerge from this crisis. The next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Judy Nwakedi. She probably needs no introduction to most of you. She's the COO of Tourvest, which is a household name in South Africa. It's a South African-owned company with a global footprint. I didn't actually know that. Previously, she was the MD of public broadcasting at the SABC. She has been on numerous boards, including South African Tourism. She's the Secretary General of the Black Business Council and chairs the BBC Women X Alliance. And because, like Kim, she seemingly has a huge amount of extra time on her hands amongst doing all of that, she most recently published Young, Gifted and Positive, which adds to her writing on the HIV and AIDS space. But what you'll learn about Judy is that she's visionary, she's fearless, she's also
Thank you very much, and hello to everyone who has decided to join in on the call. I'll answer your question first in terms of the company. Tourvest is heading for it. It's been around in South Africa, as you say, for almost 30 years. We made a strategic decision around how we would de-risk our business. And obviously, it was around a geographic spread of our business, what percentage of our business was going to be in South Africa as a proudly South African owned and a South African born company, what percentage of our business would be on the African continent, because we are Pan-African, and what percentage of our business would be in high tourist destinations. Needless to say, COVID just pulled the rug from under our feet because COVID hit every jurisdiction. It hit us at different moments in time. So when you look at us in terms of our inbound business, as soon as countries closed their borders, we already saw and felt the net impact of the business. So it's been very interesting how your strategy can be informed by the best data and the best analysis, and not in our wildest dreams had we expected a global pandemic to hit us at the same time. We have survived the Reign on Terror, we have survived Ebola, we have survived drought, we have survived moments in South Africa's history when our brand equity was being severely impacted by our reputation globally in terms of crime. So it's been a new crisis that we've had to deal with. And in a nutshell, it's been Armageddon. And for us as a business, our first and our most important driver was to preserve jobs. We have over 6,000 people working for Tourvest. So whilst for many people on this call, that may sound as a very big business, but we are in that missing middle. So not only are we hit by a global missile, but we are also struggling with a political decision in South Africa around how businesses are being supported. So the relief packages do not favor a business the size of Tourvest because we are in the middle, and more about that later. So obviously, on the one hand, you're trying to preserve shareholder value and you're trying to preserve the equity of the business, but you are faced with the reality that Tourvest, being in the tourism space, is a business that employs mainly women and employs Black women in the main in South Africa. And it is a business where people working in tourism are not amongst the highest paid earners. If we were having this webinar in an IT space or in a technology space, this is where money is made, or in an investment banking space. But people who work in tourism do not enjoy the privilege and the opportunity of huge paychecks at the end of the month, where they can invest and where they can preserve money for hard times. At a personal level, it's been extremely tough. I come from a background where the burden on a working woman, on a single woman, there is a multiplier effect. It is the black tax, it is the female tax. So it's been very hard for me as a woman, because as the retrenchments happen on a daily basis, for many of us on this call will know that when you are a black woman or a black South African perceived to be successful, when times are hard, your phone doesn't stop ringing. So as the retrenchments hit in, your salary has to go to many, many more households. So I've been experiencing that. As a black woman as well in South Africa, for many of us, we have sandwich families, which means you're taking care of older. I'm taking care of my mom. So it's hit me at a personal level, at so many levels. But, you know, resilience kicks in. And I would like to think of another way of building resilience, but I'm an apartheid child. I am a survivor of the burning years of South Africa. I was in matric in 1976. So I built my resilience out of tear gas and out of guns being shot at me. So much as I would say that I thought I had every scar in the business, I have been involved in the north of Africa in terrorism. This pandemic has hit me in a way that has severed my gut in so many ways, because I thought I was battle weary, I could weather any storm. But I think a friend had said to me, as South Africans, we understand poverty, we understand deprivation, and we understand violence. But when you are sick and hungry, it's one thing to be hungry, it's another thing to be sick and hungry. So when people ask me how I am, I say I'm tragically optimistic, because out of the tragedy, we have to remain optimistic. And this is where I draw strength from every day. And I'll talk about Tourvest a little bit more later.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, I love that, you know, the notion of, you know, tragically optimistic, because I think that, you know, even in, you know, the deepest of crisis, it's really about trying to find our human strength and our optimism. You know, when we chatted on the phone the other day, you mentioned something to me which I found really interesting, and I'd love to just talk about it a little bit more. And what you said to me then was that you feel that this crisis has had a disproportionate impact on the women of South Africa. And I don't know if you want to, you know, just elaborate a little bit more on what you meant then.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. The study that was published by NIDS, that study, where 30 researchers from across South Africa's university published, that study came out about 2 weeks ago, and it really depicted the picture of hunger. You know, it's one thing to conceptualize or visualize an idea of hunger. I remember growing up, there are 7 of us, and there was not enough food on the table. So you ate very fast, because if you didn't eat fast enough, someone would put a hand across and grab something off your plate. So I have an existential experience of hunger, and an existential experience of what it's like not knowing when the house is going to be taken away from you. I also grew up when we were relocated to the Cape Flats, where we had no running water and we had no toilets. We used to put our buckets out. We didn't even have a fancy bucket system. It was just a bucket, and you would have to put your bucket out, and you would have to pray like hell that whoever the municipality was, that they would come and collect the bucket. So you can understand the diseases and everything else that goes with that, and the dehumanization thereof. So yes, I've got a very beautiful bookshelf and I look very pretty, but that's my background. No running water, no hot water, no electricity, and no sanitation and sewage. But the results have shown that today, at the end of June, we had 3 million more people unemployed. And because of the structure of the South African economy, where women work in sectors like tourism, women work in informal settings. These are the women that have been hardest hit by the COVID pandemic, because when the shutdown happened, every informal trader, every cross-border trader, every woman in tourism, and every domestic worker, and every woman cleaning the toilets, working in supermarkets, working at airports, they had no ability to earn a living. And so because of the structure of the economy, COVID has hit the Black woman in South Africa hardest. And because of the structure of the economy globally, women have gravitated to industries where the barrier to entry are lowest. So it is the compounding impact of that and understanding the nature of work, the structure of work, the structure of the economy, that you see how women have been impacted hardest. And when it comes to hunger, a mother will feed the children first and shield the children. So the mother goes hungry and the mother suffers in silence. And that is the face of COVID. And that is the reality of COVID. And this is what we're going to have to reset as we restructure. And we need to restructure the South African economy post-COVID. Well, now, as we are redefining priorities so that we can emerge with a different structure of the South African economy.
And, you know, and I think as we think about that restructure, and one of the, you know, what we're going to be getting to in the conversation is also, you know, what is the role for women in that? You know, how do women redefine their roles, and, you know, and how do we use technology to support that? My next guest is Nwabisa Mayema. She is the strategic partner. It's such a mouthful that I can't quite get it out. She's the strategic partnerships director at the Branson Center for Entrepreneurship. She's also an entrepreneur and a speaker, and a highly regarded speaker in her own right. She has a passion in the development of South Africa's business owners and their businesses. Her focus is on delivering knowledge and insights on entrepreneurship and women-specific enterprises, not just in South Africa, but globally. She's been the partnership lead for TEDx Cape Town, and in 2019 was the curator for TEDx Cape Town Women. As you will all learn very soon, she is a wonderful storyteller. She speaks with great clarity and insight, and she can be relied on for that aha moment in any conversation. So Nwabisa, you have literally been through a journey in the last few months, even though you've basically been in the same place. And one of those things has been starting a new job. Tell us about your experience.
Hi, Velma, and hi to everyone. It's great to be on the virtual couch with you. So yes, COVID has been a hell of a ride, and I think all of us can look back and go, my goodness, what is this moment? And so for me, as I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years, and I made the decision a year ago that I was, looking at becoming an entrepreneur for entrepreneurs, which was a huge decision for me, where I'd never had a job before in terms of working for someone. And suddenly I realized that I wanted to enter the world of work and learn a lot more in terms of how I could be of support to entrepreneurs from a different point of view. And so I went through this huge process of looking for a job, and, I got a job, a really dreamy job in the tourism sector. And so that job was, I was appointed in this job in the beginning of March, and then there was a little bit of waiting that needed to happen to make sure that the paperwork would come through for this job. But I thought, it's okay, I'm safe. The whole process had been quite rigorous. And so I thought, this organization is going to keep me. We need to just stay positive. I'm also an eternal optimist. So 5 weeks into waiting to start my job, and in fact, the day after I was supposed to start my job, I got the call that the job had been frozen. And for me, that just felt like, this world closing in on me, because it felt like I'd made this really big decision. I was moving through this shift. There was a huge mental sort of, reorganization that was happening, moving from being an entrepreneur into joining an organization waiting for this job, and then this job being pulled away from me. So of course I had a woe is me moment in terms of, did I make the wrong decision? Is the universe communicating something to me? And of course it's saying, well, maybe you feel that special and that unique, but at the end of the day, this is a pandemic. No one was equipped for this moment. Nobody was ready for this moment. So figure yourself out. So luckily for me, I'd already been a trustee in the Branson Center of Entrepreneurship since the center relaunched in November last year. And so for me, which speaks to the power of keeping relationships warm, the power of social capital, I was able to reach into some of those networks and realize that there was a job on offer for me in the center. And so, as you know, we believe everything happens for the right time and at the right moment. This job for me right now feels like I've come home. I've come into an organization that is here to enable impact entrepreneurs and to get to a point where we're starting to think about businesses of the future, businesses that are purpose-led and of course have a positive impact on people, the planet, and of course profits. And so I feel like there couldn't be a better moment than right now to be positioned in this moment, in this organization, with what we have in store for entrepreneurs. And so it's been an interesting journey, somewhat harrowing, but here I am.
And I mean, you spend a lot of time with, entrepreneurs and most likely women business owners. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how they've responded to the crisis, both, positively, but also, some of the, what some of their biggest struggles are?
Sure. So I think in terms of some of the unspoken struggles, especially when you're talking to women entrepreneurs who are Black and are probably in their mid-30s, a lot of us are starting to take care of the aging parent. And so when moments like this comes through, it's anxiety of obviously trying to keep your business afloat and possibly save jobs. And at the same time, realizing that your job and your business was possibly a site of, income generation, which not only went into your own family, but was also starting to look after aging parents or then other parts of the family. And a lot of the time, that burden falls on the girl child. So we're seeing a lot of Black women entrepreneurs struggling with that and kind of feeling sort of like locked into this place of anxiety, sadness, despondency. Whereas I think when we look at a lot of our male entrepreneurs, and particularly white male entrepreneurs, there's this sense of screw it, let's do it, let's just try again, let's pivot. And it's seen as learning, but actually a lot of women entrepreneurs don't have that luxury of just trying it out. In terms of a more positive point of view, we're starting to see a lot of entrepreneurs interrogate why they're in business. And so maybe similar to Kim's story, which was Kim had defined her business and her success by her ability to create jobs. But actually what's going on there is that we're starting to see the emergence of Kim's purpose, which is I'm here to enable other people and to create communities. And so I think entrepreneurs are starting to interrogate their purpose and are starting to think about why they do business, and therefore they start doing business differently, and are then maybe able to let go of a couple of things that were maybe feeding into other notions of what it means to be successful as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I think, we cannot, when you talk about, the challenges, it's not just about this is my business and I'm losing money. It's, all of the mental burdens and the anxiety, and there's so much, and the uncertainty kind of this period, that is wrapped up in that, and what one needs to consider when you're thinking about how people are responding. And last, but certainly not least, we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Stella Buma, who's the Deputy HOD at the Department of Applied Information at the University of Johannesburg. She's a champion of the 4IR, and she's driven by a robust passion in the area of ICT development and adoption, with a focus on technology adoption by township and rural enterprises. She's also a contributor to We Will Lead Africa, which is a collection of stories of African women leaders who are having an extraordinary impact every day. She's in good company because she's also won numerous global awards in the field of education, leadership, and applied information studies. And what I really loved in her bio was a quote by Jim Rohn, which gives you a sense of this remarkable woman. And it says, challenge of leadership is to be strong but not rude, be kind but not weak, be bold but not a bully, be thoughtful but not lazy, be humble but not timid, be proud but not arrogant, have humor but without folly. So Stella, please, can you share with us what it's been like to experience this crisis within higher education, where I know that things that you had been planning to do within the next 5 years suddenly had to happen within 5 weeks? How has the sector responded to COVID, and what has it meant for the role of the university?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to my sister department, STH, for inviting me into this wonderful session with remarkable panelists. I think definitely COVID-19 has left many of the sectors in the world affected, not only higher education. We are feeling the presence of it as professionals, and moreover, like my fellow panelists have indicated, as citizens, as African women, as Black female women in the continent. So you see, I grew up in the township, and I was privileged to be raised in the village. So I'm a township and I'm a village girl. So although I'm currently residing in an area where I have access to fiber, fiber is just installed, and connectivity or access is not an issue for me. It's good, however, it feels like a nightmare because on a daily basis, I have to deal or hear many of my students, many of my fellow family residing in the townships or in the village, who don't have the same privilege of getting access and connectivity. Hence I'm living in a nightmare of reality. I'm a village girl and I'm extremely connected to my roots. My privileges will never disconnect me to where I come from because, home, hence I call myself a village girl or a township girl because that's home for me. Here in Johannesburg, it's more like I just came to labor to work, but home is where I come from. So I cannot separate the two. And hence I'm having this nightmare reality where on a daily basis, one has, encounters a student who's struggling with other issues, socioeconomic challenges that are very close to my eyes and my ears. It's not something that I only read about. But I guess the concern is the uncertainty of the pandemic itself, not knowing when universities will return back to normal. And I think the danger that COVID-19 has brought is that it may destabilize not only institutions of higher learning, but the possibility that it may destabilize institutions of learning as a whole. The pandemic landed at a time when there were huge efforts that are being deployed to transform and improve higher education. So it is not for the first time, however, that we have suspended academic activities in the universities. We all know of, the student protest, were a major manifestation of shortcomings and the failure of transformation of higher education, were making a big buzz. So they have also emerged as an illustration of an expanding frustration of the state of institutions in South Africa. So the extreme inequalities, the widespread poverty and the huge unemployment rate that is forever increasing, it's haunting us, and not that it's a reality that we were not aware of. So as much as one appreciates an impressive increase of the number of, my fellow cousins in the townships, my fellow neighbors in the village, the so-called previously disadvantaged students, including those from very poor households. I think the biggest concern for me is the digital learning acceleration, which revolves around the digital divide. And I say the digital divide is a problem in higher education. It's really not new, but I think it is magnified by COVID-19 pandemic and the closure of universities. So all you need to do, from my space, is to conduct an online lecture with a class that enrolled about 100 students. And you kind of see 20%, 30% of students pitching up. And when you try to investigate further, is I cannot connect, or either I'm residing in a 4-room house with 10 siblings or 6 family members. That's a reality that I know, and I get to understand that Now, what do we do? How is that learning gap closed for those on the wrong end of the digital divide? I think firstly, when it comes to South Africa, it can never be a one size fits all. You know, we have to generously admit that we are in an equal country. You know, I think that's just my introduction there. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. You know, and I think, you know, your comments really, you know, get us in many ways to the crux of, you know, what we're here to discuss today, because, you know, what we've seen is that there's been, as a result of COVID, there's been this huge digital acceleration. So it's, you know, we've, you know, as we see, you know, 90% of people who are, you know, on this are dialing in most likely from their homes. You know, previously something like this would have happened in person. We would have all had to go to the University of Johannesburg. We would have taken half a day, you know, taken an hour to get there, an hour and a half, including for this, plus the, you know, the networking and the coffee, and then an hour to get home. So it's half a day out of our time. And now, you know, we're dialing in over lunch. So that's really good. You know, there is the risk at this point that my 18-month-old toddler is going to come running in, and then maybe the dog, and, you know, but there's been this incredible kind of acceleration. But at the same time, you know, there's the digital divide is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And those that don't have access, you know, there's just more and more of a chance of getting left behind. And so, Kim, you know, I think through the work that you've done with Kwela and sort of really kind of exploring social entrepreneurship, what do you believe are, you know, some of the opportunities to use technology to try and provide greater access for, you know, women, ideally in township and rural communities?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that the first thought that I had a few weeks ago when it was announced that the schools are closing again, and specifically the public schools, you know, my first thought was like, why the public schools? Like, surely the private schools should be closing, because at least, you know, a majority, or let's say a large majority of kids who attend a private school maybe have access to data, or maybe have access to internet at home, and at least they could continue studying. Whereas I think the Daily Maverick published an article about the fact that only 10% of South Africans have access to internet at home, and the majority of South Africans attend public schools. And so if I use that as an example of you know, of the importance of access to the internet, for example, the Airbnb experiences, or, you know, or connecting, or you know, rallying together for a cause, all these things, or further educating yourself, these things all happen at the moment over the internet. And if you do not have a device, and if you do not have an internet connection, you are set at a huge disadvantage. And while I see the internet being a hugely enabling tool, I do worry about it creating an even larger divide in our society. As an example, Ubuntu Base is an online platform, and we service healthcare workers. So anything from a porter, a nurse, you know, a registrar, or a doctor. And the majority of our signups at the moment are doctors and registrars, because they've got smartphones and because they've got access to the internet. Whereas, you know, the nurse in rural Eastern Cape is the one who really, really needs like a safe space, actually, because she's living in a multiple family household and needs to protect her family. So how do you then get WhatsApp technology, for example? How do you start monitoring people's COVID symptoms through WhatsApp? How do you start educating through WhatsApp? You know, that's maybe as an example, how do we rethink education, online education in mediums that already exist? You know, education via SMS as a starting point, and then, you know, developing those technologies, and until we have enough data and you know, hardware to go around the whole country. Yeah, so I think that having access to the internet is huge, and being able to have these conversations using technology is massive. But as someone pointed out in the Q&A, like, what are we going to do about data? The cost of data in South Africa is exceptionally high. So yeah, that's kind of, those are kind of my thoughts about that, is that I worry it creates a bigger divide.
I mean, one of the opportunities that we've created at Airbnb is we've got our experiences business, and obviously in a pandemic, one-on-one kind of close kind of experiences is not something that's going to happen. So we literally, from a health and safety perspective, closed the in-person experiences business, and we pivoted to online experiences. And we started to see that in lots of other places around the world, this has become a real opportunity for experience hosts to make really good income streams, because suddenly, people were at home, they were looking for other opportunities to earn a bit of, for other opportunities for entertainment, and they suddenly could be plugged into a global audience. And so we have got some incredible hosts, in township communities, and we really wanted them to see this as an opportunity. But the challenge was connectivity, so internet speed. It was very difficult for them to have the speed and the connectivity to be able to engage with an audience for that amount of time. And then also, the cost of Wi-Fi, or the cost of data. So there are all these sort of increasing, barriers.
And I think also, like with Kwela, we had to pivot super quickly. Within 2 days, everyone had a Rain SIM card and a tablet. And we were like, right, we're going to be teaching online. So everyone's going to be sitting at home. And the problem we faced with women in our cohort is that they're now sitting at home. And at home, they fulfill different roles. They're a daughter and they're a mother. And so it became a whole, the support of the community is so important, because in the end, we had to call off the program because the families couldn't sort of reconcile the fact that you're sitting in your room on this computer and just playing computer games, whereas you should be cooking, you should be fetching, you should be providing, what are you doing in there? Get off the computer. And so halfway through the English class, they'd have to just leave. And that's a challenge, how do you sit for 8 hours in your home where you don't have a separate room perhaps, and then you can't fulfill your role as a mom or a daughter, and as a and provide for the family. It's complex.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to some questions that we've been getting through, and the one question is from Anita Menderata, and she asked a question about, with tourism recovery being 100% dependent on travelers rebuilding confidence in re-entering the world. We've been locked out for over 150 days, and everybody is hypersensitive to health and safety. Judy, do you have any thoughts on how technology can help to build traveler confidence? What are some of the things that Truvest is thinking about, some of the ideas that you have?
It's a great question, and it builds on what Kim was saying, that technology really is an enabler, especially in our sector, because all the trends before, and I hate the word trend, so let me say, when you mine the data was challenging destinations around their product offering. And people more and more wanted authenticity. They wanted personal, and they wanted new. And now comes COVID. All of that is gone. So Tourvest, believe it or not, we say we are a technology company in the business of tourism. And we have developed some of the most prized tourism technology back-end operations. We have one division which is leading the world at the moment in our tourism travel services, which is an incredible solution around travel management and cost management when it comes to travel. So that is an unbelievable breakthrough technology that we have. I can't talk too much about that because of time constraints. We run a major account for British Airways, which is the buy on board operation. And there we built the expertise in terms of our boutique offering to have the best point of sale. So when it comes to point of sale, in the tourism business, we are world leaders. And part of the challenge now with that technology is to move it out of the tourism space into any other sector. So very exciting developments there around technology. The chairperson of Tourvest is one of the biggest South African IT players. It's Kojima IT. The CEO of Tourvest comes from Didata. I come from the nuclear space, and if you may allow me to say this, people who work in nuclear, we always believe we were the panacea. Doesn't get better than that when you work in nuclear. It is high tech, the smartest, the best technology. We work in that space. Just a little bit of an aside. You know, I was with Motorola in Chicago, and that was when telecoms was riding the wave in terms of share price. I then moved to nuclear, and in the anticipation that we would build 6 nuclear power stations in South Africa, because I come from an area where Coburg, it's one of the world's best nuclear power stations. Now I am in tourism, so it feels like every industry I go to hits this point, and then I've got to reinvent. So when it comes to technology, all the comments are absolutely valid. You know, we are entrepreneurial, but we are also slightly corporatized. And we are dealing with simple issues like, how do you reimburse in terms of the cost? Because if you've got a flat fee in terms of what you can claim at the end of the month, now all our IT costs increase. So you can see that simple things like working from home requires a re-engineering of your processes and your policies. But those are the easy ones. I think the important thing for us as women, and this is what a woman, Esther Perel, talks about, COVID has required us to be very clear around how you set your boundaries, because you can be working 24/7 before you know it. Because if you're working like Tourvest, multiple jurisdictions with different time zones, you can be working in one part of the world where it's nighttime and then it's daytime. So you really, really need to be very disciplined around how you set boundaries, how you negotiate your world of work with your teams, with your people you report into. And so for me, you know, when children run around in a Zoom meeting, or where your child is desperately needing to speak to you, for me, this is fantastic, because it puts at the center stage for the people that we work with, that this is the reality of a woman at work. I always say that when my phone rings in the boardroom, in a board meeting, I don't have the privilege of having a wife who can deal with the issue. I am wife, I am mother, I am husband, I am caregiver. Most men don't get bothered in a boardroom by things in terms of the house, but women get bothered. So the reality of COVID has demonstrated to the world that this is how we work. You have to be all things all the time if you don't have a wife. One day, that's my next business. I'm going to develop an app where you can buy a wife. Do all of these things.
At a great cost.
Tinder.
I think that's true.
Tinder or Grindr.
I think that,
So,
I mean, what has also come through is, you know, just the roles of women. You know, it's not just a woman in the workplace, it's as a mother, it's as a daughter, and it's this kind of this multitude coming, you know, together. That was a great segue to my next question, sort of going from the Tourvest more corporate space to Nwabisa in terms of entrepreneurship. You know, Judy, if Judy was going to start a business, a technology business actually, coming out of this, it would be to buy a wife. What do you, in the space that you're in, what do you see some of the, you know, opportunities coming through for entrepreneurs, and specifically kind of thinking about how do they use technology to kind of navigate the strange future that we're going into?
Sure. So I think for me, it starts off with understanding that, really to reiterate Judy's point, which is that technology is the enabler. It's not the thing. So I don't think it's very interesting for any of us to be walking around saying we want to create the next Facebook or the next Google or that sort of thing. Those are businesses that have already been created. We're sitting with the most incredible capital here in South Africa, which is then our people. And so it actually speaks then to sort of, observing data, which tells us that people, if we put people first, we're more likely to be sustainable and more likely to then succeed, and not looking at people then as bodies in jobs, but looking at people as centers of different communities. And so being able to then leverage on that and really rely on the network effect as we grow our businesses, that starts being a shift in the mindset, which I think is important for us to look at. Then, of course, I think it's important for us to look and see, why has there been so much disruption at the moment? And it seems as if a lot of businesses and a lot of corporations were not necessarily positioning themselves as businesses of the future. And so a business of the future, in terms of what I look at, is a business that really is defining impact based on solving challenges that are very, very close to our existence. So challenges around food security, access to water, safety, environmental damage, equal opportunities. I think that's where we can start looking in terms of creating businesses that solve for those challenges, because that starts building resilience into your business. And of course, it always starts with purpose, as I've mentioned before. And so I think that's what we need to be looking at as we start thinking about our businesses for the future.
And so, what you talk about is, thinking about businesses for the future, and, it's not about the technology, but it's actually thinking about, like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And so, what's always interesting for me working at Airbnb is that Airbnb was born out of the 2008 crisis. And so I feel that, as we emerge from this, there are so many problems that we need to solve, and therefore so many opportunities for, creating new businesses and thinking differently. And that brings with it, the need for a different mindset, and, thinking, the kinds of things that we've talked about, or, are about, lifelong learning, embracing a growth mindset. And Stella, from the higher education point of view, knowing that people are no longer go into a job and then they stay in that job for the next kind of 30 years. People are likely to have multiple careers. You're also, you're a specialist in 4IR, and that, jobs that we're likely to be doing in 5 years' time, we don't even know exist now. I think I've got sort of two questions for you. The one is, how is the university thinking about lifelong learning? And then secondly, like, if you had to give any advice for your students or people on this call, how would you encourage them to think about their studies and their careers within this new paradigm?
Yeah, just maybe before then, to say that I share the same sentiments with my panelists regarding technology being the enabler. I think that's the space where I come from, not necessarily a champion of 4IR. I've got my vice chancellor who's leading in that space. I'm in the information systems discipline and advocating more of, the township small businesses and rural small businesses. And I think almost everything developed for the 20th century workforce is being dismantled and reconstructed. And higher education is no exception to all of these disruptions that are happening. I think universities must reevaluate their roles now and what they could grow to be in the future. At UJ, the institution that is led, of course, by the thought leader in artificial intelligence, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Marwala, we are already modifying our programs to answer the skills demands of the fourth industrial revolution, because whether we like it or not, it's here. It's more like, reminding me of my uncle some years ago when he said he will never do, transact any of his financial online using technology, or rather go to the bank. This is a person that today has never been to the bank for the last 5 years, and he gets traumatized to think about, he doesn't even know how his bank looks like, on a face-to-face level. So I think we as universities, it's necessary that we should gear up on skills development, you know, to serve the demands of the industry, and that includes the tourism. It is important that we continually learn and update our skills in order to stay relevant. You know, there is a dire need for lifelong learning to enable individuals to access learning opportunities in different ways, you know, for different purposes and at various career stages. You know, we need to build education models that reflect this change and cultural problems, you know, or either the culture that promotes it. So it's very important that we advocate for that. And I'm saying this because we do have a problem on the ground. If I look at the reality that's happening on the ground, it's very clear. We have a problem. You know, amongst others is the ever increasing unemployment rate that I spoke about, you know, but luckily for us, we have the informal sector, which has a potential to contribute significantly to this crisis. And we have to think about how to really adopt technology. And I'm saying adopt because you either choose to adopt or not. But, you know, well, township food outlets, the spaza shops, the traditional medicine sellers are contributing billions to the economy. We have massive informal economy, which is unrecognized and unmeasured. And very people know that there is a huge economy in the townships. I mean, the township food is sitting with 87 billion rand a year and about 50,000 outlets, spaza sector, with 250 billion in 1 year, just 100,000 outlets. And I'm not counting the salons. I know I'm having a bad hair day, hence I'm having the Duke. But, you know, salons also that contributes to the economy of this country. The backroom rental, which is worth about 20 billion rand a year. I mean, these are called businesses. And I want to highlight that when we talk about businesses in South Africa, we also include township and rural small business. And often we kind of not even define them correctly and label them as survivalist. And meanwhile, some of them are not really survivalist. I think the question is, why are we still seeing the increase of unemployment rate and the poor remaining in poverty? So we really have to look at the challenges that we are having and the fact that how do we measure the informal sector and how do we then come up with policies that speaks to them. We don't need policies that are exclusive, policies that are 20 years old or that maybe are from the old apartheid time. We need to look at how we regulate them and also how do we support them to grow and stimulate the economy. And I know I'm jumping into the township space because, I feel like I'm an advocate for them in terms of technology adoption. So it is important to understand that even though we say technology is an enabler, technology has no mercy. It's not going to beg you to say, are you going to use Zoom today like we are? At some point you will have to adopt or be disrupted. So I think, the government needs to look at issues of allocation of radio frequency spectrum, address the issues of ICT infrastructure, the ICT cost that is faced by township and rural small businesses. And all of this lack of inclusivity drives me mad and, leaves me in a nightmare, because the reality is that the representation of informal sector, it's really huge and it's contributing hugely into the economy, but I don't think we are paying too much attention to them, or either we see them as, they are still struggling and so forth. And that speaks to the tourism sector as well. How do we then support this as small businesses that are operating in the sector? And by the way, I do know that tourism, Judy, has always been ahead of the curve when it comes to innovation or technology adoption. I mean, the tourism sector was one of those that digitized their businesses on a global scale, such as the introduction of flight and hotel bookings and so forth. So I don't think they will have a problem in adopting. And moreover, those that are in the township, I mean, by nature, they are flexible. They easily adapt, unlike the others. So I'll leave it there, because if I touch on the township business.
So, I mean, Stella, I think, I love that, I love your passion. And I think your attitude of saying, like, I won't let them be left out. And I don't, there's no option for these businesses not to be recognized and for us not to include them, that's not an option for us going forward. So we are at time. And so I'm going to do something just to wrap up, and I'm going to have a round of rapid fire. One of the things I wanted to leave the audience with is just, it's so much of this is about changing mindsets and starting to get people to think differently about how we approach our work, our careers, our learning. And there's an opportunity to redefine the roles of women and to rethink the rules. And so I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds. And I'll do 5 seconds when you've got 5 seconds left, just to give a little bit of advice. I might make it 45 seconds because I think 30 seconds is very short. 45 seconds just to give the audience a little, some last thoughts and a bit of advice on what would be the kind of your key takeaway on what people need to think about in terms of redefining the roles and rethinking the rules when it comes to women in tourism. Nwabisa, you're at the top of my screen, so I'm going to ask you to go first.
Great. My advice would be something that's very, very close to me, which is build your networks. Understand who are your peer mentors, who are mentors who've walked the path ahead of you, people who can coach you, and of course, people who can sponsor you, meaning that they can open doors for you. Build that network because that allows for you to build resilience into your strategies and into your actual personal well-being.
Wow. That was 25 seconds. Thank you. Kim.
Awesome. Thanks. I think my lead on that was be a mentor. So I think that, take on the mentorship, but then take the time to mentor others around you and realize what you have. Because when you become a mentor to someone else, you suddenly realize the power that you have, even in a moment when you feel completely powerless. I think my second thing is #girl hustle. Like, there's nothing wrong with hustling and, doing whatever you can to make ends meet and follow your dream. And there's, sometimes it seems irrelevant, but it really is real. And that's it.
Great. Judy.
Tourism is an amazing sector. We do it because we love it, and people will continue to travel. People have always traveled. People are curious, people want to find out, and people want to know the other. So my message firstly is that for all of us in tourism, we need to ensure that we use technology to sell South Africa as a brand. We need to be clear, we need to be concise, and we need to be consistent to keep the message alive that South Africa has followed protocols. We are ready to receive the world. I think that is very, very important. So we must use every technology platform available to us to get that message out. Brand South Africa, that we are a great destination, and come and visit our shores. We are ready to receive you. My final message as a woman in tourism, defeat is not an option. We will encounter many, many defeats, but we must not be defeated. So we as women, we need to continue to fight. Nobody is going to give us what we want. So we are our own agency. So we've got to go out there. We've got to get in the way. We have to stay in the way, and we have to stay in the faces of those men who have guarded their power jealously. Go out there, girls. You've got to do it for yourself. We have to do it for ourselves, like the women who took to the streets when they marched to give us Women's Day. We have to keep fighting.
Amen, Judy. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I could not agree more. And Stella, some final words from you, please.
Thank you. I think if I may leave those that are in business to operating or located in the township or rural area, is that remember that your business, when we talk about small business or a business, we include township and rural businesses. And the fourth industrial revolution is not a ho-ho, like I always tell my kids. It's not something that we should be scared of. It is upon us, and we need to continue to adapt to this era of rapid technological and societal change. And how fast we are able to adapt to these changes remain a core question of our time. Education is a key factor in how we navigate in these changes. So we need to continuously educate, hence I spoke about lifelong learning. However, we must collectively take responsibility to adapt if we need South Africa, if we need tourism sector to become globally competitive. We can acquire high-tech industrialization just by addressing the national developmental challenges that we are having of inequality, high employment, rate and poverty. So please, small business includes township and rural business in bold letters and capital letter. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would love to thank my wonderful and inspiring guests on this Wednesday afternoon talk show for your insight, your wisdom, but also for sharing your hearts and your vulnerabilities. As one of my favorite authors, Brené Brown, has said, I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right. And I believe that as women, and not just as women, all of us, the only way to survive and thrive is to embrace lifelong learning and a growth mindset, which means that we need to seek out mentors in big and small ways and really, embrace opportunities for learning. And I believe, it's definitely been that for me, and I hope it's been that for everybody else that's dialed in. I think a conversation with these women has been just that. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for letting us all learn. Also a big thank you to the School of Tourism and Hospitality for pulling this together, and to Dr. Diane Abrahams and her team, and for giving us this platform to be able to connect and to learn. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one of these. Thank you.
Thank
Namaste.
you. Stay positive and corona negative.